Right, so in Washington, the green light came not with a flourish of diplomacy, but with a nod and a wink. Donald Trump's quiet assent to Israel's Gaza City takeover was a kind of presidential blessing that travels faster than any press release does, understood in Tel Aviv as a license to proceed, and in much of the world as proof that the United States has chosen sides with eyes wide open. No grand speeches about human rights, no pretense of mediation, just a silent approval that makes all atrocities possible. Tehran, meanwhile, is doing something Western capitals will find far harder to spin away. Iran has dragged the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation into an emergency session now, warning that the takeover of Gaza is a fast track to a humanitarian catastrophe and now demanding collective action. Or it'll be them next, perhaps. One power is oiling the wheels of occupation in the shadows, the other is sounding the alarm in broad daylight. And for as much as Iran are permanently positioned as baddies, good luck to the media in spinning that line after this. Right, so what's happening in Gaza right now isn't just another chapter in an already too long and bloody story. It's a collision of forces all coming together now. Israel has signed off on another genocidal move, this time to seize Gaza City as a first step to complete control of the Gaza Strip, a military gamble that even some of its own top security officials say can't be won. Over in Washington, Donald Trump has quietly given his personal nod, not written into any official policy, but still carrying all the weight of US backing. Yet at the same time, and in polar opposite to all of that, Iran is stepping into the spotlight once again, calling an emergency meeting of the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, to rally opposition to this. But the OIC itself is split, and those divisions will decide whether this becomes real action or just more talk. And through it all, Western media are finding it harder than ever to keep control of the story, because the roles of pariah and partner are being flipped in a way they'd rather not admit. The result is a moment in which the military, political, humanitarian, legal, and informational strands of the Gaza war are all at once becoming exposed, offering a rare chance to see the underlying narratives and actions of the conflict and the global order sustaining it. The Washington Post has reported that the Israeli Security Cabinet has formally approved a plan to seize and secure Gaza City, a move that Benjamin Netanyahu has framed as essential to dismantling Hamas and reasserting Israeli control over the security environment in the Strip. Same story, different day, isn't it? The plan, according to this reporting and corroborated by others, involves a two-phase operation. First, the evacuation of civilians from the city, or forced displacement, you can read for that, and then a sustained ground incursion to target Hamas infrastructure. What counts as what, you have to take Israel's word for, though. Hamas infrastructure has previously been schools and churches and, frankly, anything still standing. We know what it all looks like by now, don't we? Now, Netanyahu has insisted this does not signal a permanent occupation, but that claim's rather difficult to reconcile with the mechanics of the plan, which require maintaining control over a city of hundreds of thousands in a territory already under siege, with the plans to move into other areas of the Strip until the entire Strip is under Israeli control in the next phase. International humanitarian law is explicit on the prohibition of forcible transfer of civilians in occupied territory, except for their own safety in temporary circumstances. But the pattern in Gaza has been anything but that. Previous temporary evacuations have become long-term displacement, with Palestinians unable to return to their homes for years, if ever, as Israel systematically level entire blocks and their homes no longer standing. So in that sense, the Gaza City operation, even before it begins, is freighted with legal and moral questions that reach far beyond just the simple details of military tactics. But what makes this decision all the more significant is that some of the strongest critiques come not from Israel's adversaries, but from within its own security establishment. Press TV has quoted Ami Ayalon, former head of Shin Bet and once commander of the Israeli Navy, warning in stark terms that Israel is fighting a war it cannot win. Ayalon's critique is grounded in decades of experience, not only in intelligence, but in the political aftermath of security operations. He understands that Hamas is not simply a military formation that can be destroyed with sufficient firepower. It's also a political movement with deep roots in Palestinian society, bolstered paradoxically by the very siege and bombardment that Israel has employed to weaken it. One minute they're telling us Hamas has been destroyed, the next they've rebuilt their numbers almost entirely. Ayal Zamir, the current IDF Chief of Staff, has also raised operational objections, as reported by the Financial Times. Zamir has cautioned Netanyahu that occupying Gaza City will likely imperil the lives of remaining hostages, draw the army into protracted and costly urban combat, and stretch the IDF's resources at a time when the northern border with Hezbollah is becoming all the more volatile. Other reports have captured the strategic risk of such an operation in the analysis of the likely shift from conventional battle to entrenched guerrilla warfare, noting that Gaza's dense urban terrain and tunnel networks effectively neutralize much of Israel's technological advantage. From Hamas's perspective, the Israeli plan is both a provocation and an opportunity. In a statement also reported by Press TV, the movement condemned the occupation plan as an escalation doomed to fail, and vowed to resist until the last soldier leaves our land. Hamas is likely to use tactics honed over years of asymmetric conflict versus Israel: ambushes in narrow streets, improvised explosive devices, the extensive tunnel system that allows fighters to appear and disappear in moments, so much of which is still intact. Such resistance is not only military costly for Israel, it's also politically potent for Hamas, which can portray survival itself as a victory in the face of overwhelming force. The humanitarian implications of the operation are already coming into focus as well, though. El Pais has carried recent testimony from Gaza's medical personnel, warning that the territory's health system, already crippled by blockade and bombardment, cannot withstand another wave of mass displacement and injury. The last thing we need is a new mass displacement, one doctor said, underscoring the impossibility of absorbing additional casualties when hospitals lack electricity, fuel, and the most basic of supplies now. The United Nations has warned that famine conditions are already present in parts of Gaza, and that further disruption of food and water access could tip the entire population into acute crisis. Well, what are you going to do about that then? Keep sitting on your hands? Into this volatile mix comes the role of the United States. The bloviating orange corpuscle that is Donald Trump has privately given what aides describe as a green light to the Gaza City operation. In foreign policy practice, the president's assent is the assent of the United States. Allies and adversaries alike understand that a nod from the White House, even behind closed doors, constitutes a policy position. In this case, that position aligns Washington with a military action condemned by the UN and warned against by Israel's own generals. So this is not without consequence either. Time magazine has reported that Germany, key Western allies staunchly on Israel's side for too long as they have been, have now suspended arms sales to Israel linked to the Gaza war, citing concerns about international law. About flaming time, a lot of you might be thinking, but it is this plan to completely occupy the Gaza Strip that's tipped them now. At this point anyway, for how long, who knows. But this divergence within the Western alliance undermines the narrative unity that Washington prefers to project. That what they do, what they choose to do, the rest of the West supports. That Washington basically dictates all their separate foreign policies, all Western foreign policy, especially when attempting to frame Israel's actions as part of a broader war on terror rather than a campaign of occupation and land seizure. So it's against this backdrop now that Iran has now acted with deliberate timing and purpose. As again reported by Press TV, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has called for an emergency meeting of the OIC to address what he's called a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, explicitly linking Israel's actions to breaches of international law. The OIC, with its 57 member states, is the largest intergovernmental organisation in the world after the United Nations, and its resolutions, whilst again non-binding, still carry significant political weight, particularly in the Muslim world and the broader global south. So by initiating this meeting, Iran is positioning itself now as the most vocal state champion of the Palestinian cause, all at a time when many Arab governments remain publicly muted on it, or worse, complicit. It also forces those governments to take a position, members of the OIC as they are too, either aligning with the humanitarian language of the resolution, or exposing their unwillingness to confront Israel and by extension the US. The OIC's internal divisions, however, are deep. States such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, Bahrain have either formalised ties with Israel through the Abraham Accords or maintain close security relationships with Washington. These governments are likely to resist any Iranian attempt to include enforceable measures in the resolution, such as sanctions or boycotts or the referral of Israeli officials to international courts. Their strategy will be to attempt to dilute any text that's presented, emphasising humanitarian concern whilst avoiding any language that could commit them to specific actions. Yet the political cost of openly opposing a condemnation of Israel's actions is steep, given the strength of pro-Palestinian sentiments amongst their populations. Trump's ambiguous green light, absent a formal US declaration, offers them room to manoeuvre. They can support a watered-down resolution and present it domestically as solidarity with Palestine, while assuring Washington that nothing in the text obliges them to confront Israel directly. If the OIC meeting fails to produce meaningful action, therefore, Iran still has several options to preserve and even enhance its own position, though. It can consolidate a smaller bloc within the OIC that are willing to adopt stronger measures, states perhaps like Yemen or Malaysia, Indonesia, and Pakistan, and present this coalition as the authentic voice of the Muslim world, rubbing those other Muslim states' noses in it, so to speak. It can escalate its support for the axis of resistance, encouraging the likes of Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iraqi militias to increase pressure on Israel through their targeted military actions, which have been going on or have been paused and, well, in the case of Hezbollah, paused and may well be starting up again soon. But it can also engage in high-visibility humanitarian diplomacy, organising aid convoys or flotillas to Gaza even. The idea has been floated quite recently, after all, some more of which are already planned for later this month. A significant flotilla event is due later this month. And of course, that would compel Israel either to allow entry, ceding a propaganda victory, or to block them, which is the far more likely, creating a public relations crisis for themselves nonetheless in doing so. They could also try the UN, Iran could, couldn't they? But good luck with that, frankly. For Western media, so pro-Israel as so many of them are, this moment presents something of a challenge, though. Outlets such as the Washington Post or Reuters or the Financial Times, pick your poison of your whichever mainstream media outlet you have. There are far worse than those outlets, of course, have reported extensively on the risks of the Gaza operation, including dissent within Israel's security establishment. Yet these same outlets operate within a framework that resists casting US policy as complicit in war crimes. Their coverage of Iran's OIC initiative, if they cover it at all, and right now none are, is likely to emphasise Tehran's boogeyman-style ambitions here, highlight divisions within the OIC, which are legitimate to a point, and recall Iran's own human rights record as something of a gotcha perhaps, even if it's not relevant at all to the current discussion or issue, thereby diluting the moral clarity of this humanitarian appeal, as it were, at least to those audiences of it. In the global south, by contrast, though, the framing will be far more direct. Iran as the state willing to act where the West enables atrocity, the OIC as a test of the Muslim world's credibility, and the United States as increasingly isolated alongside Israel. This framing is not merely academic, this is media bias for you. It's present in all media, whether they claim to be independent or not. There's always inbuilt biases, and we all have to read between the lines to a degree. But especially in this era of instant global communication, such narratives splits deepen mistrust in Western media and fuel alternative information sources, independent and alternative media, as well as access to foreign media. And when you've done that for a while, you realise just how poor Western journalistic standards in the mainstream really are on the whole. So the United Nations, for its part, remains paralysed too, hence my belief Iran is wasting its time if it goes to them, but perhaps it will do so just to say it's ticked that box. The Security Council is hobbled by the certainty of a US veto on any resolution targeting Israel, as we've seen every time before. The General Assembly can pass resolutions by overwhelming margins, as they've done, but these are always non-binding and carry no enforcement mechanism, save for the Uniting for Peace option, which there still seems to be no appetite to take. Peacekeeping forces cannot be deployed without the consent of the parties, which Israel will never grant for Gaza. Even when UN commissions of inquiry conclude that Israel has committed grave breaches of international law, these findings are relegated to reports that gather dust in New York and Geneva. The UN's inability to act decisively reinforces the argument, advanced by Iran and others, that alternative forums such as the OIC must fill the vacuum, therefore. So the moral and strategic case for a ceasefire has never been stronger. Militarily, the operation is unlikely to achieve its stated goal of dismantling Hamas. Politically, it risks deepening Israel's isolation and strengthening the very forces it seeks to weaken. Humanitarily, it will accelerate a crisis that already verges on famine and epidemic. Trump's personal endorsement binds the United States to this course, but it also risks alienating allies, galvanizing opposition across the global south, and eroding Washington's ability to shape the post-war order. Iran's initiative, whether or not it yields a strong OIC resolution, has already shifted the diplomatic terrain, forcing the Palestinian question back to the centre of the Muslim world's agenda. If the Gaza City operation proceeds, it will not only devastate the immediate humanitarian situation, but also crystallise the moral bankruptcy of the current international order, in which the most powerful states can greenlight atrocities without any fear of consequence, and the institutions charged with upholding the law are reduced to issuing statements of concern and strongly worded letters. Of course, one course of action outside of this particular debate that can still hurt Israel in sufficient amounts too is the matter of BDS, boycott, divestment and sanctions. And one state leading the charge on that more than most is Slovenia, of all places right now, having already implemented a full arms embargo on Israel, the first European nation to do so. They've now followed that up with another blow to the genocidal apartheid state, which they're not going to like at all, especially when it hits them in the trade department, which is suffering so much. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the very same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.